Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague, Eric Henry, also of Horns247.com. You can see it right there on his little nameplate. So, good to have you back on Horns 24. I'm just kidding. Eric had 24/7 Sports. We're all part of 24/7 Sports, the preeminent network for college football, college basketball, all things college, the team sites, preeminent, 247sports.com. And Eric, full disclosure, we are recording on May 21st. And we have a lot to get into as usual here on the Flagship podcast. Now, Eric, last time we spoke, you were wearing a muscle shirt in Florida. Now you're back in Austin after driving 17 hours straight. Good heavens. That sounds painful. From your hometown of Tampa back to Austin, Texas. You're okay? Any road warrior stories we need to know about?
Listen, I am okay. The only thing I am battling is, of course, Chip. I don't know if this happens to you, but inevitably it always happens to me. You know, working this job, we're on airplanes, we're in packed press boxes. And I'm pretty good at, taking the vitamins and making sure I'm getting some rest and hydrating and all that stuff so that I don't get sick, right? Because in our field, we can't afford to get sick because there's no time off, especially during the season. But inevitably, seemingly every year, Chip, as soon as the season ends and my body, I think, just knows that we're done, something will happen. And I don't know if I'm battling like a little sinus deal or just a little cold, but that is the only road warrior injury that I'm battling. I am playing hurt. It's my flu game. Luckily, I have MJ by my side. I am Scottie Pippen, but you are MJ and you will carry me. But yeah, that's the only thing I'm battling. Outside of that, the drive, 17 hours is a monster. I can't say that in my time covering Group of 5 football, the furthest I ever drove was 11, which was from Florida to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and back to get to Middle Tennessee State University. So 17 definitely is a monster. So when I drove to Tampa, I split it in portions. But no, I am all good. Happy to be back in Austin, Tejas, wearing a sleeved shirt because that is the strongly worded recommendation of the folks that pay the bills that sleeves are required. So we will do that. So I am wearing my college football playoff semifinal Sugar Bowl hoodie that I feel like all of us amongst the Longhorn Media Corps have gotten some use out of, Chip, since we got it in January.
Oh yeah. My wife has stolen mine. So yeah, she's always cold. I'm always hot. So I was like, okay, yes, you can have my Sugar Bowl hoodie to stay warm. All right, Eric, football season never ends here on the Flagship podcast, especially in May. And we had a fun little exercise. The Horns 24/7 staff, those of you who are members of Horns 24/7, I'm sure you spent some time on Sunday looking at our roundtable, where we each weighed in on the most, outside of quarterback Quinn Ewers, which Longhorn on the 2024 roster is the most indispensable. Do you want me to go first or you go first with your selection?
Well, I'll kick it off, Chip. And as I wrote, it's pretty obvious that Quinn Ewers is the most indispensable Longhorn, right? Like, listen, I don't care what team you are, how stacked you are. You can't just take an all-conference level, dark horse Heisman trophy candidate type of quarterback. And if you're going to miss that player for an extended period of time, you can't just replace him, no matter how much growth Arch Manning has had. And Chip, I think we've seen that, especially last year. Not that Malik Murphy didn't come in and do an admirable job, but we did see some slippage in terms of the efficiency of the offense, right? So that's demonstrated. So we put that aside. Outside of Quinn Ewers, my choice was cornerback Malik Muhammad. The reason for that is this. It's the sum of all parts, Chip. I'm a firm believer, and I've said it ad nauseum on this podcast, you're not going to replace T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. We even talked about it. Got into a nice little discussion, I thought, last episode, Chip, in terms of kind of, spitballing where the Texas run defense may land in 2024 in terms of yards allowed per game. Even if that number's 100, 105, 108-ish, that's still darn good. That's still top 20 in the nation, right? But it's
108 was best in the SEC last year.
There you go. But it's not third in the nation, right? It is not stifling. It is not the type of run defense that literally force teams to decide we're going to abandon the run from the jump, right? So you're going to have to kind of replace that. And Chip, we may come back to this later in the offseason. I'll give a shout out to Jeff Howe. He coined it. They may have to moneyball the defensive tackle spot. I kind of like the way he used that, of course, playing homage to the old Oakland A's, right? Where they kind of just, couldn't high price for agents. So they just got guys who, filled roles, right? Maybe that's what it will be. But we have that stated on the record. And then I'm also on the record as saying, I think losing a Jalen Ford, while he didn't have the type of year that he had in 2022, he was always a guy who was going to force a fumble, a timely fumble, get a timely interception. So let's say Texas, Chip, a team that did struggle forcing turnovers up until last year under PK, right? PK, obviously, they did struggle forcing turnovers. Let's say that they take a step back, not a drastic step back, same with the run defense, but let's say they take a step back. So they're not forcing as many turnovers as they are, right? That means the secondary has to rise to the occasion. And while I do firmly believe that a lot of the yardage, or let me not say a lot, because that's a general phrase, a measure of the yardage allowed by the secondary last year was in part because teams played behind and because teams were just throwing the football out the gate. You want to be better than you were. You don't want to be 12th in the conference in anything. Manny Muhammad's a big part of that secondary rising to the occasion and being better. Anyone who listens to this podcast knows how big of a fan I am of Jahdae Barron. But Jahdae Barron plays a role where I'm almost going to undercut what I've said for the past year of being a part of this, staff. I think the star position is incredibly valuable. Steve Sarkisian calls it the glue of the defense. But there is a difference in terms of what opposing teams are able to do to you with the star versus that outside corner, right? In terms of what you're going to do, route tree, et cetera, with their receivers. So Manny Muhammad, at least as we're taping this, is the only true shutdown corner on the outside. We know Jahdae Barron is excellent at what he does at star, and we'll see maybe if he gets kicked around outside, we'll see what happens. But Manny Muhammad was the team's highest graded corner in pass coverage last year on Pro Football Focus. They need him to take another step. To the indispensable part, Chip, and I'll pass it back to you on this, just look at what's behind him. I'm a big Gavin Holmes guy. I think Gavin Holmes played really well at Wake Forest, and I thought he played well last year. But that's kind of in terms of, Gavin's not the biggest corner. I don't necessarily know if he's a great matchup as a number one corner on the outside. You have Javion Cole, someone who I wrote about extensively, talked with his former defensive coordinator. But he's not, I don't think you want to necessarily have him be ready for prime time this early. Someone who it was stressed that his physical development is something that still needs to come around, right? So Manny Muhammad, even from a depth perspective as well, you want to have him in tow. So for all of the reasons that I said, I think this offense is going to hit the ground running. Chip and I talked about last week. I think they'll top 40 points per game. But for all of the things I talked about, with this being a sum of all parts defense, I don't think they can afford any attrition, any slippage, any regression in terms of what they're able to do with the secondary. And a big part of that is Malik Muhammad.
Yeah, I love Malik Muhammad. I think he is going to be He's going to be all SEC, maybe all American. The question is it this year? Is it next year? But I think he is absolutely headed in that direction. And his leadership is huge because we know he's got that. He's got that in him. He's a vocal guy. He's not afraid to speak up, and that makes him even more valuable, in my opinion. It's a good, fun topic because there are multiple candidates for most indispensable Longhorn in 2024 outside of Quinn Ewers. And I went with Alfred Collins. And here's why. Some of you say, well, they got all kinds of defensive tackles in the portal who can manage the job. Bill Norton, Jermaine Lole, Tia Savea, and they have Vernon Broughton coming back. Here's why Alfred Collins, to me, becomes the tip of the spear and most important player outside of Quinn Ewers, most indispensable, I should say. It's because Alfred Collins has the goods. He's 6'6", 325 pounds, is the highest graded returning player on defense, according to Pro Football Focus. He's good against the run. He's got, I want to say plus, I'll say plus pass rushing ability. He's got a huge wingspan. He can bat balls. But he's got the ability, if he takes that next step, if he takes the step that we saw T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy take, he's got that ability to command the double team, even from the 3 technique. And that allows Anthony Hill, Texas's rising sophomore, now middle linebacker, to play free without offensive linemen getting to the second level and Anthony Hill having to shed blocks and make tackles, which is a huge reason why Jalen Ford was so successful the last 2 years, because with T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy in front of him in 2023, with those two and Keandre Coburn and Moro Ojimo in front of him in 2022, he wasn't getting a lot of second level offensive linemen coming for him. He was able to see the field. He was able to really, truly read and react and play free. I always say Ray Lewis was a phenomenal athlete. He was even better because he had Sam Adams and Tony Siragusa in front of him on that 2000 Ravens defense. And Alfred Collins, although he's not a real vocal guy, he needs to be. Hopefully he will be. Because, Eric, he needs to be a culture warrior in that defensive tackle room. Here's the deal. If you bring in 3 defensive tackles in the portal, and Bill Norton and Jermaine Lole and Tia Savea have all been big-time contributors on quality defenses that fared, Arizona pretty well, 118 yards per game rushing last year, 25th. Jermaine Lole was part of the 9th ranked run defense. Those guys are going to have opinions. Those guys are going to have their own ideas. Well, we did it this way. We did it this way at Arizona. We did it this way at Louisville. Alfred Collins needs to gather that group and say, okay, guys, here's how we do it at Texas. And we need to all be on the same page. You got to have those alphas in a room, like the offensive line and the defensive line. I think Alfred Collins is that guy because he's capable of making the kind of plays that will allow him to lead. You can't lead from the bench, and you can't lead when you're making mistakes. Alfred Collins showed us last year that he's moving up. He's moving in the right direction, and he needs to take that step. If he can be that guy that's raising everyone else's level around him, then watch out. And And so to me, there's no more important position on the field outside of quarterback than a difference-making interior defensive lineman. I think that is Alfred Collins. And speaking of which, in the Insider last week, talked about some of what we talked about last week, Eric, in bringing in these defensive tackles who I just mentioned in the portal. It's going to be essential that they have a nose tackle who can command the double team. Because if you remember, Byron Murphy was the nose tackle in the Texas defense because he could split double teams, and T'Vondre Sweat is a nightmare for playing on the outside shoulder of the guard. That's a nightmare for a guard to try and single block him. You have to help. So the tackle kind of has to chip him and still get out, or you're trying to, you're leaving a tight end in to help because the tackle has to help on T'Vondre Sweat. Basically, you have two guys getting double teamed, and that allows the middle linebacker and all the linebackers to run free and make plays. And that's where this is going to be really important. I think Bill Norton is probably the most important and Jermaine Lole, honestly, because Lole's played both nose and three technique. Norton and Lole need to be a guy who can command a double team. And I kind of like the idea and we'll see, Vernon Broughton might be that guy, and that might allow Bill Norton and Tia Savea to line up together like they did at Arizona. Jermaine Lole and Jure Bledsoe. I'd love to see Jure Bledsoe take another step with that athleticism. He can play the three technique. And then we have to see if Sydir Mitchell what kind of shape he's in, what kind of mindset he's in. Because ideally, if Sydir Mitchell would have progressed and been, totally in shape and totally into it, and maybe not gotten a little lost after Bo Davis left and the month before Kenny Baker was introduced, Sydir Mitchell could be that guy, and they wouldn't have had to go get three guys in the portal. But Sydir Mitchell's still here. They still believe in Sydir Mitchell. They think he's going to be a monster. They're telling him that. And he's got to have a great summer. So it's going to be interesting, Eric, because I think we all think Anthony Hill is going to be a star because he was a freshman All-American. He made plays, 2 sacks on third down against Alabama. But playing the middle is different than playing weak side or rushing the passer as a strong side linebacker. And he's going to be wearing the helmet communication, it appears. And that's a lot because he's got to communicate everything. He's got to see it, communicate it, and be the kind of the mission control of that defense. The last thing he needs is a bunch of offensive linemen getting through the second level and complicating his. Now, he's physically capable of, taking on blocks and shedding them, but life's a lot easier if you don't have to do that and make the tackle.
Definitely a lot to touch on there, Chip. I'm going to start with the defensive line, work my way back to Anthony Hill. So I think most people who watch and listen to, the Flagship have a fundamental understanding of Texas defense, but for anyone who may be a casual, I feel like this is key to note in your explanation, right? And Chip, if you feel I'm saying anything out of line, feel free to stop me as I'm going. But when you talk about the nose in this defense, we're not talking about an old school 3-4 nose tackle who's just a space eater, right? We're not talking about someone who's just big for the sake of being big, just take up space. When you're talking about the nose in this defense, yes, you do need to command a double team, but you also need to be dynamic enough to make plays off of that double team and be a run stuffer and help open up things for some of the other players on the defensive line. And that's where I think your point is so astute, Chip, because we've talked about this being having the potential to be a big-time year for the ends, right? For Ethan Burke, Barron Sorrell, for guys coming off the edge. Now
Trey
those guys can
Moore,
be
Colin
Trey
Simmons.
Moore. No, Trey Moore. Absolutely. Now those guys can be athletic as all hell, but that starts, in my opinion, with what's going on in the interior defensive line, right? It's going to make their job that much easier if they don't have to worry about guys shifting some of the attention from the interior to them. So that is where you need, whether it is a Bill Norton or Jermaine Lole, not just to be someone who's just a guy in that spot, right? But someone who opposing offensive line coaches have to say, okay, this person is capable. Again, likely not to the same rate of Byron Murphy, but this person is capable of blowing up a play, a run play, penetrating a double team and putting that up the middle interior pressure on your quarterback, getting in his face, right? That's just going to make life easier for the rest of the entire defense. So just wanted to kind of add that point there. Secondly, I think it's really interesting the point you make about Alfred Collins, and I'm going to ask it to you in the form of a question, because when I interviewed AC, spoke about that at the Sugar Bowl, AC is someone who, despite being a mountain of a human being, is kind of a mild-mannered. I don't want to call him shy because I don't know him that well, but a mild-mannered guy who, Chip, I guess we'll explain it for those who, obviously weren't there. They had, the starters, right, on the field and certain select players on the podium. But if you weren't part of that group, everyone else was just kind of on some chairs hanging out in the back, right? And Alfred Collins was the guy in the far back of that group. Just to your point about him in terms of being a vocal guy, who knows if that's within his personality? But the question I have for you is this, because again, it's key to note this. You can't be, I don't care what field it is. If you go to your 9 to 5, right? No one's trying to listen to the backbencher talk about what you need to do, right? You're trying to hear it from the people who are in the trenches doing it. Alfred Collins, whether it was not being consistent or not being a starter, being the third, fourth, fifth guy in the rotation, you kind of can't be that vocal guy. And obviously, when you're talking about just forces of nature and T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, and then before them, right, Moro Ojomo and Keandre Coburn, you can't really do that. So, Chip, the question I'm asking you is this. Any of those guys prior, the past 2 years at the defensive tackle spot, before they got their opportunity, could they have been characterized as Alfred Collins prior, but they just needed the opportunity to step into that starting role to then fully command and embrace that being a vocal culture type of leader?
Keandre Coburn liked to talk. Moro Ojomo liked to talk. Byron Murphy does not like to talk, but he will tell you what's going on. And T'Vondre Sweat can certainly talk. He's got the personality. And we saw T'Vondre Sweat throw Jalen Ford out of the way to get a tackle for loss against Texas Tech. And I think that's where, Alfred Collins, he's got to grow up. He's the man now, and he knows it. He's a fifth-year senior. This is a big decision by him to come back. He knows what's expected. He's going to have to get out of his comfort zone, because if he wants to be a high draft pick in the NFL, he needs to be a guy who not only knows exactly what he's doing on the field, his assignments, his technique, but he's got to be a guy who can rally the guys around him and make them better. And so I think it's a little bit of a reach. It is not his personality. And if he doesn't get out of that comfort zone, when things are going wrong, and they will, who's going to be that guy up front? It could be Anthony Hill. He's certainly got that personality, and he's a fierce competitor. So we all know in the heat of battle, if you're making plays and you're confident, you're going to say something. And that's where I think, Kenny Baker, he's got to bring that out of him as the new defensive line coach at Texas. So I think it's the next step for Alfred Collins. So it's you're in my case of saying he's indispensable. I'm looking at the talent. I'm looking at the physical tools, all that, and the fact that he played well last year. And now he's got to grow. He's got to become that guy. A guy who's quiet, who came out of his shell as a senior, was Charles Omenihu. Charles was quiet, and he wasn't incredibly productive. But then his senior year, I think he had 9.5 sacks. He became he had success. And with success came confidence. And with confidence came some vocal leadership. And I don't know even if his vocal leadership was always the right kind of vocal leadership, but he became more vocal. I think Alfred Collins' personality is such that he will lead in a way that will help inspire and make those around him better. We'll see. It's huge because I was talking to Brian Robinson the other day, Brian, who was on that 2005 national championship team. And he said, you're not going to replace Tavondre Sweat. You're not going to replace Byron Murphy. You are going to have to do it by committee. And by committee, he meant not only the multiple defensive tackles who are going to be in the rotation, but also Anthony Hill, David Benda, Mo Blackwell, guys who've been in this defense, guys who know what this defense is supposed to be doing on every play. Ethan Burke, Baron Sorrell. So easier said than done. The competition goes up. It's a different world. And we're going to talk about the expectations all summer long here on the Flagship podcast, but everyone is putting Texas in the top 5 preseason, Georgia, Texas, SEC championship game. You're playing Oklahoma and you're coming home and you're playing Georgia.
Right.
You're playing Florida and then you're going to play Arkansas. And then you're home against Kentucky and then you're going to play Anna. And they're not even playing Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, Missouri. I think Oklahoma's drawing all those teams, but anyway, it's going to be fun. Eric, I know it's hard to believe there were actually 5 players who did not enroll early at Texas. Texas had a record number of early enrollees, 19, I believe. But there are 5 who are arriving, trickling onto the campus. Our man Hank South wrote about Silas Bolden, Oregon State's leading receiver last year, 54 catches, 5 touchdown receptions, 5'8", 175 pounds. But I love how this guy plays. He plays bigger than his size. He's fearless over the middle. He's got great footwork in and out of his breaks. He gets separation in tight quarters. He's on campus. And first of all, I'll just get your thoughts there before we get into the other 4 who are arriving on campus right behind him.
Chip, I don't want to underestimate Silas Bolden's value in the return game. And I know that sounds mundane, but we're not just talking about a guy who returned kicks, all willy-nilly. He's one of the top return guys in the nation, especially in the kick return game, an area that Steve Sarkisian noted last year at times he wanted more out of, right? Of course, Keelan Robinson toward the end of the year ended up breaking one, take one to the house. But that's an area that Silas Bolden has an opportunity to come in, step in immediately and be a player. And that's not, denigrating the fact that, sure, Oregon State's leading receiver last year, someone who plays much bigger than his size, as you said. And I think he's a guy who's going to be a factor in the wide receiver rotation. Now, where's that going to leave guys like Ryan Wingo and Jonte Cook? Who knows? That's a Steve Sarkisian problem. He got to giant raise this offseason to figure out that problem, well above my pay grade. But Chip, whenever I think about the receiver spot, I lean on the question that I asked Steve. And it wasn't necessarily in regards to Silas Bolden. It was in regards to getting players out of the portal for the spring session and kind of how transparent you can be with those conversations. And Steve said, hey, I try to be very transparent with all our guys, but especially when you bring guys in the portal, because the last thing I want is someone who come August 31st is on the sideline because they thought they were going to get 25 carries a game or 50 something snaps, and they're not getting it, right? But then, they're running fourth team come August 31st, season opener. That tells me that the conversations with Silas Bolden, again, you're not going to guarantee someone a starting spot, but I feel like, Chip, and again, I'll pass to you on this. You let me know if it feels out of line, that the conversation with Silas Bolden had to be a little bit similar to the conversations you had with Adonai Mitchell last year, right? Maybe not necessarily the 50 balls, 10 touchdowns, goes to the NFL, but we got a spot for you on this team for you to be an impact player, not just in the return game where you have been one of the best in the nation, but as a receiver where, ironically enough, Silas Bolden, and you talk about being fearless, he played the majority of his snaps on the outside. He was not just a guy you lined up in the slot and said, all right, go, use your shiftiness and we'll get you a quick ball. Like, no, he lined up on the outside. So that tells me that Silas Bolden is going to be a factor in this receiver rotation. It should, as long as he comes in, does what he's supposed to do, hits the ground running, which, again, you're talking about a veteran guy, someone who seemingly is motivated. There's no reason to believe he wouldn't come in ready to go. I expect that he'll be part of this rotation and be an impact player.
Yeah, that's going to be and I agree with you on the kick return game. You lose Keelan Robinson. You bring in Silas Bolden, and your special teams, and I like Jaden Blue on kick returns, but because he's got the speed and the size. But hey, like you said, Steve Sarkisian's got first world problems. He's got talent coming out of his talent on the offensive side of the football. And he's making $10.3 million to make those decisions. The other four players who did not enroll early and are going to be trickling in to campus this weekend, defensive lineman Melvin Hills from New Iberia, Louisiana. And you love the football players coming out of Louisiana. And Melvin Hills, 6'3", 280 pounds, probably up to 300 pounds by now. Let's see what he's got, because there have been big-time impact players who did not go through spring, showed up in June, and became instant impact players. Calvin Banks, Derek Williams. So keep an eye out, because there's a really good chance one of these players we're going to mention here, punter, kicker Michael Kern from your home state of Florida. All I can say is Jeff Banks, he usually has this stuff dialed in. This kid must be special, because as of right now, it looks like they're planning on him being the guy. And that'd be great, because Texas has been doing 1-year rentals. Daniel Trejo from Texas Wesleyan 2 years ago. And then Ryan Sanborn, a grad transfer using his COVID year, and did an outstanding job. 47.5 yards per punt, flipped the field in several critical situations. Offensive lineman. Oh, go ahead.
I'll be super quick. Had a chance. Obviously, I've talked about my time covering FIU down in South Florida. That's 45 minutes away from St. Thomas Aquinas, where Michael Kern is from. Had a chance to talk with a couple of people who kind of are very familiar with him. FIU's current punter Dayton Montiel, who those you know how the kickers and punters are. They all kind of run in a pack, right? Especially when you're all from the same region up in Broward County. So he's very familiar with Michael Kern. He told me, he's like, listen, I'm speaking as Dayton. He said, I was good enough to get a scholarship to Marshall. This kid is 5 times the punter I was, and raved about him. And Dayton's dad has been a longtime special teams coach. His dad was a Division I punter and has been a longtime special teams coach in South Florida for Cardinal Gibbons, which is actually the rival of St. Thomas Aquinas. And David Montiel said that Michael Kern is someone who, if it's just in terms of sheer talent, he said, listen, obviously there's a big difference between kicking at STA and kicking in the SEC, right? But just in terms of the sheer ability, he's got it. So just wanted to add that in really quick.
Yeah. That's great news. That's great news for Texas fans right there, because no one thinks about the punter. And the only time you think about the punter typically is if something is going wrong. Because even when they kill it and flip the field, fans are like, oh, that's nice. But man, you have a punter who can drop balls from midfield inside the 5, like my man Michael Dixon with that kind of pitching wedge, backspin, and all that. Man, that's a game changer. Offensive lineman Nate Kibble from Atascocita, where Sam Cosme is from. Sam Cosme, no one was doing cartwheels over Sam Cosme, 3-star offensive lineman out of Atascocita. All he did was become the second offensive lineman drafted over a 10-year span after Connor Williams. So very interested to see what Nate Kibble's got. And then really intriguing prospect, Santana Wilson. Santana Wilson, who can play corner or safety, is the son of Adrian Wilson, the multi-time Pro Bowl and All-Pro. Adrian Wilson, who played for the Arizona Cardinals, then worked in the front office of the Cardinals, is now working in the front office of the Carolina Panthers. Adrian Wilson might have had a little something to do with, drafting Jonathan Brooks and Jatavian Sanders. But Santana Wilson, top 300 national prospect. I'm very intrigued to see what he brings to the table. 6 foot, 180 pounds, probably, 185 by now. But there are the 5 non-early enrollees.
Yeah, Chip. I mean, of those guys we've talked about it, right? The one's probably going to have the most immediate impact is Michael Kern. But as you said, there's room for guys depending on how well they can hit the ground running between now and August 31st to possibly earn a role. I mean, I think the offensive linemen, safe to say they this offensive line is pretty set. I think with Melvin Hills, that feels like an uphill climb given the amount of vets you got, right? So probably safe to say he's got his spot. And then listen, one of my favorite players, Chip, as a kid was Adrian Wilson. Not the biggest safety in the world, but that dude would tackle, would hit. Loved Adrian Wilson. He was there with those Cardinal teams before they took off with Kurt Warner. So big Adrian Wilson fan. Of course, great bloodlines with Adrian Santana Wilson. So yeah, I mean, think again of those guys, I would say Kern and maybe Adrian Santana Wilson can be that guy who earns a spot on special teams. Seems like a Trey Wisner, right? That's a possibility. So we'll see. But as you talked about, this class was loaded with guys who were early enrollees, and that is certainly something special. Should be a leg up for the Horns by the time the season kicks off.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so real quickly, we should mention this because it's just kind of bonkers. We talked about how Texas is going to play at home on November 9th against Florida. Well, Florida's head coach, Billy Napier, just got sued by the backup quarterback at Georgia, Jaden Rashada, who initially was committed to Florida. He says in a lawsuit filed against Billy Napier and a Florida booster because they promised him $13.85 million to be a Gator, which caused him to walk away from a $9.5 million NIL offer from the Miami Hurricanes. Eric, I don't know what's going on in your state of Florida where they got all this NIL money to throw at quarterback prospects, but something tells me that you get two schools that are in-state rivals trying to get up on each other, and the benefactor is the student athlete, baby. Bidding wars over talent. I think this was early on. I mean, it was early on in the NIL game. No one's getting $13.85 million to come for however 1, 2, 3 years. I think the average, the top end guys are getting probably around 800,000, maybe a little more than that, but most of them less than that. But anyway, Jaden Rashada says, Billy Napier and Florida booster guy, you promised me $13.85 million, and then you pulled it off the table, and you cost me $9.5 million from Miami.
Chip, okay, all right. Listen, so never full disclosure, we try not to run over an hour with these podcasts, just for the purposes of editing. So I'm not going to run too long on this. So I'm just going to get right to the point, Chip. When I heard this last year, it smelled fishy because of everything you just said. Those numbers sounded insane.
Insane.
And listen, Chip, I'm going to use a dating analogy, all right? If someone comes to me and I'm going to leave my girlfriend and you tell me that you've got Sydney Sweeney waiting behind door number 1, woo, I need to see that Sydney Sweeney's there before I make that leap. And then if you tell me, okay, Sydney Sweeney's behind door number 1, and, I'll just use, a classic fave of mine, like Selma Hayek is behind door number 2, woo, I need to see that Selma Hayek is behind door number 2. Because then I'm left with nothing. You're not just going to tell me that you have these things, right? Like, come on. What do we, Chip? I'm going to pass back on this. Like I said, I'm not going to rant forever. But in my home state of Florida, there are plenty of people, and I'm not going to say anyone by name because I represent a company and I don't want to get them sued. But
good move.
It's known for people purporting themselves to have measures of funds that they do not have. This is not like Texas where people tend to have the money that they're purporting themselves to have. Okay. So the whole thing smelled fishy, and I feel bad in one sense for the kid, but at the same point in time, I don't know who's around him. None of it sounded right and none of it passed the smell test from the beginning. And even if I'm to pass up this hypothetical money that you tell me I have, I better damn sure see what's behind door number 2. That's it.
Why are you talking about Nevin Shapiro like that? Just kidding. All right. But actually, this does lead us into a situation that might be impacting Texas basketball right now, because Texas basketball, we know, has shown interest in New Mexico rising sophomore 6'9" forward JT Toppin, who's also, flirting with staying in the NBA draft. He has until May 31st to make that decision, but he's also listening to offers and considering a college transfer. Well, we know Texas is interested, but I was told yesterday that Texas Tech is very much interested and might be willing to break the bank for JT Toppin, particularly knowing that it's Texas that they're up against. And Tech has some big money guys, Cody Campbell, who have tons of money, played football at Texas Tech, loves the Red Raiders, loves having a lot of money. And so the question is, at what point does it become where it doesn't make sense, where the price is going up and it doesn't really fit what the coach is comfortable with, because if word gets out, if the kid talks and the rest of the team finds out, what? JT's making that and I'm only making this? Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'll be quick. I think we talk about managing the dynamics of 118, whatever the limit is nowadays with a FBS football roster, right? That shrinks even more when you're talking about a basketball roster. And I would hate to be in the shoes of a particular hardworking, scrappy Texas guard that Chip loves, who may not be getting the type of money that is rumored around JT Toppin. And then he's got to look up and see someone that is commanding X amount of money, because that would cause an issue in any locker room. So at a certain point, you got to bow out, in my mind, especially when it comes to basketball. Now, JT Toppin, in terms of just on the court, Chip, a big would be a much welcomed addition, probably an addition that puts Texas in terms of, instantly a top 15 type team, but you have to consider all things in your locker room. So we'll see. But that's just my take on it.
Well, and the reason, much like Dominic Williams, the TCU defensive tackle transfer, who people were, kind of riding the wave of the agent in terms of a bidding war, is because multiple years of eligibility. And that just makes the player more valuable. Sure. With JT Toppin, he averaged 12 points, 9 boards as a freshman. And look, could he have a great year and be gone? Did you get your money's worth? That is all in the eye of the beholder. So fascinating to watch. But Texas basketball, they feel good about what they have. They feel good about it. Julian Larry, the point guard, and Jordan Pope, the point guard, and Tremont Mark, the big wing from Arkansas, who is a 3-level scorer, and Jason Kent, 6'8", forward, who kind of takes over for Dylan Mitchell, who's now at Cincinnati, for God's sake. So would they like to add another big, preferably with some returning eligibility? Sure. But don't forget, they still have Zenrik Onyema. Don't laugh.
Listen, I'm not laughing because I saw Big Z in CUSA. I'll just say this. Any expectation that he was going to come and be an impact guy last year, that was fool's gold. But he's got the size and he's got the frame. So we just hope that he can round out his game entering this year. So that's what I'll say.
All right. Real quick, before we get to some take it or leave it, number 1 Texas softball did their thing thanks to sophomore pitcher Mac Morgan's no-hitter. She walked a batter with 2 outs in the 7th. Otherwise, she would have had a perfect game. And then they close out the regional, beating Northwestern thanks to freshman pitcher Tegan Cavan's 12 strikeout performance. Not bad. They now take on A&M. And Texas baseball they're playing tonight. So we're recording on Tuesday. Texas baseball, the 3 seed at the Big 12 tournament in Globe Life Field in Arlington, is taking on a desperate 10th seeded, barely qualified for the Big 12 tournament field in Texas Tech, which has been ravaged by injuries to their pitching staff. They have to win the Big 12 tournament to extend. They have not missed the NCAA postseason since 2015. They're going to have to win the Big 12 tournament. So interestingly enough, the pitchers in this game also factored into the decision in their game 1 meeting in their series in March in Lubbock, won by Texas 22-8. Two Texas players hit grand slams in that game. Ryan Galvan and freshman Will Gasparino. Max Ballou, the Big 12 Player of the Year, kudos. That was announced this week. He hit a 3-run bomb in that game, and Porter Brown hit a 3-run bomb in that game. So both of these teams, and it'll be over by the time most people hear it. So Texas, we know, has to ride their bats. Texas men's tennis. Eric, I said they would win the national championship if they stayed healthy. They didn't stay healthy. My man Pierre-Yves Bailly had a wrist injury. He didn't even play in the semifinal match, but he played in the quarterfinal match, but he played against TCU and lost to Louis Maxted, a guy he beat twice earlier this year, and TCU got a player back in Seb Grosny, who ended up winning the deciding point against sophomore Jonah Braswell. So Texas finishes number 2, runner-up for the national championship to TCU, which wins its first men's tennis national championship. And Micah Braswell, this is worth mentioning, 37-match winning streak. He is now the highest seed left in the NCAA singles championship. Go, Micah, go. And number 8, Texas women's golf finishes tied for 11th at the NCAA championships. Eric, you ready for some take it or leave it?
I am ready for some take it or leave it.
All right, we're going to do a speed round of take it or leave it. Coming up next. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on. All right, Eric, we have 3 take it or leave it's. Who's going first?
I'm serving it to you first. The non-early enrollee will have the biggest impact for Texas in 2024 is the aforementioned Oregon State wide receiver transfer Silas Bolden. Take it or leave it.
Well, hell, after what you told me about Michael Kern, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to go with the freshman punter who lit it up at St. Thomas Aquinas High School there in the great state of Florida. Eric, I'm leaving this. How about you?
I was torn because the word impact was really torn on that. But at the end of the day, because Silas Bolden can return kicks and give you some impact, give you an impact in the receiving game, I'm going to go with Bolden. For just as a receiver, I'd go Kern, but I'm going to go Bolden because of the special teams impact chip.
Okay. All right. Eric, the most dangerous game on Texas's schedule that no one is talking about is Florida on November 9th in Austin. Take it or leave it.
I am leaving it. I think the most dangerous game on Texas schedule that no one's talking about, quite frankly, is Texas A&M. And I just think that being a rivalry game, that one, all the history, it's in College Station at Kyle Field. I think that has all the makings of a trap game. So I am leaving it. I think the Gators are quite frankly, Billy Napier's a good football coach. Dealt with him during my time covering G5 football, but still too many things that needs to be fixed with the Gator program. So I'm leaving it, Chip. What about you?
Okay, I'm going to leave this as well. The game that just keeps screaming to me is the game before the Texas A&M game. I think the fans will have that game built up. It's probably already getting built up in the players' minds, that A&M game I'm referring to. But the week before, and I don't like Kentucky, who I think is going to have a good defense. They always run the ball under Mark Stoops. They are a power run football team. They've got, another transfer quarterback who's talented. I think that even though it's at home and it's sandwiched right between road trips to Arkansas and A&M, I think that Kentucky game, and who knows, as we get closer to the season, I may totally change my mind. But right now, I think it's Kentucky. All right, Eric, take it or leave it, number 3.
You think Texas over-under for regular season wins in 2024 should be set at 10.5. Take it or leave it, Chip.
You know what? I'm taking this because 10.5 is kind of the sweet spot. Like right now, I'm kind of inclined to say Texas goes 10-2 in the regular season. Still makes the college football playoff. They probably have to go 11-1 or more to. We're talking about the regular season, so I won't even talk about the SEC championship game. I'm gonna take this, Eric. I think 10.5 is the sweet spot. What say you?
I am going to take it as well. The two games that I think are in most jeopardy, of course, are Oklahoma, because, of course, always a dangerous game. Can never underestimate the Sooners. And, of course, Georgia coming to town. I think that, so you have 10 games that in my opinion, are very much, should be in Texas's favor. And then do you kind of flip-flop one of those games between the Sooners and the Bulldogs? So, yes, I'm taking it, Chip.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everyone kind of thinks, Texas is better off than Oklahoma because they have Quinn Ewers, and Oklahoma's moving from Dylan Gabriel to Jackson Arnold. But I do think Oklahoma's defense is going to be a lot better. I think Brent Venables is getting that defense where he wants it. He's got Danny Stutzman back, Billy Bowman back. He's got Dominic Williams. They're going to be strong right up the middle of that defense. And Georgia, not to mention that A&M game you talked about and how amped the Aggies are going to be for that one, and a potential banana in the tailpipe like a Kentucky or insert, are you kidding me, possible upset here. All right, kids, there you have it. I think that was an action-packed episode of the Flagship podcast. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm glad my man Eric Henry is safe after a 17-hour marathon drive from Tampa back to Austin. Sorry, ladies, that he's not wearing the tank top this week, but you never know. You never know what's coming next week unless someone at the home office said, "Hey, Eric, keep those muscles to yourself." All right. I don't care either way. For the record, I want you to be comfortable. Life's too short. All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. You need to be an annual member there so that you get all the goodies that come with that. And believe me, there are goodies. I'm not supposed to talk about them because it's, but there are goodies. And you get VIP access to all the team sites on the preeminent 24/7 sports network. So, sign up today to join horns247.com so that between flagship podcasts, we can all hang out together. All right. Until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.